It was a quiet afternoon in the first-class lounge of a luxury airport terminal, an oasis of comfort, exclusivity, and wealth. The kind of place where only the most successful or famous people could be found, sipping champagne, waiting for private jets or first-class flights. In the corner, a stunning woman sat by the window, her dark hair swept back, her sharp features illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. She wasn't just anyone. This was Carrie Moss, a well-known actress who had graced the silver screen for years. Carrie was used to being recognized, used to the glances, the whispers, the awe. But today, she was trying to enjoy her moment of peace, a rare break from her chaotic schedule. She had just wrapped up a long press tour and was looking forward to some quiet time before her next big project. That's when he walked in. John Richardson, tall, impeccably dressed in an expensive tailored suit, with a confident stride that screamed arrogance. He was the type of man who thought his wealth could buy him anything. And when he saw Carrie sitting in his spot by the window, his face contorted with a mix of confusion and annoyance. Without a second thought, he marched toward her, his designer shoes tapping loudly on the polished floor. Carrie looked up, her eyes meeting his as he stopped in front of her, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "That's my seat," he said bluntly, his voice dripping with entitlement. "I reserved this spot. You'll have to move." Carrie raised an eyebrow, the audacity of the man taking her by surprise. "Excuse me," she replied, her tone cool but firm. She had been through a lot in her life, dealt with countless rude people, but something about this encounter felt different, more unsettling. "I said," he repeated, his voice growing more condescending, "that's my seat. The view is perfect from here, and I've been looking forward to this moment all day." There was an uneasy tension in the air as other people in the lounge began to notice the exchange. Whispers spread like wildfire. The rich businessman confronting the famous actress. What would happen next? Carrie stood up slowly, her expression calm, but her heart racing. She was no stranger to these situations. Celebrities were often the targets of arrogance in places like this, but she wasn't going to back down. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, the door to the lounge opened again. It wasn't just anyone walking in. It was Keanu Reeves. Keanu wasn't just another celebrity. He was a legend in his own right, humble and beloved by everyone who knew him. But today, his presence would shift everything. He caught the eye of the situation immediately. Without a word, he stepped into the tension, his quiet authority undeniable. As he walked toward Carrie, the room seemed to hold its breath. "You should be careful," Keanu said softly, his voice cutting through the silence, but with a certain calmness that demanded respect. "When you think money can buy anything, you might find out it can't buy decency." John stared at Keanu for a long moment, unsure how to react. His pride, his belief that he was untouchable, was starting to crumble. The air thickened with suspense, and the murmurs around the lounge grew louder. The confrontation wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was becoming a standoff of values, power, and respect. Everyone in the room waited for John's next move. Would he back down? Or would he continue to push? What would happen when a billionaire was faced with something money could never fix? Carrie took a deep breath, grateful for Keanu's presence. She glanced at him, and for the first time today, she felt like things might be okay. But the next few moments would change everything. What happens when someone believes they're invincible, only to have that belief shattered in a single encounter? What would you do if you were in her shoes? The question lingered in the air. Would you stand up for yourself, or would you let it slide? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Carrie Moss wasn't just an actress on the big screen. Her life was filled with layers. Some of those layers held glittering moments of fame, but others were deeply personal, dark, and full of pain. Born in Canada, she had moved to Los Angeles at a young age to pursue her dreams of acting, but the road wasn't always paved with silver and gold. The harsh realities of Hollywood, the pressure to be perfect, and the endless expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. But Carrie was no stranger to hardship. Growing up, she had learned to be strong. Her childhood was far from ideal. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she had to navigate the turbulence of living with her mother, who struggled to make ends meet. Carrie's drive to succeed wasn't born out of a desire for fame or fortune, but rather from the necessity of escaping the pain and instability of her early life. She craved stability, independence, and a sense of purpose. Her rise to fame came quickly. After landing roles in a few notable TV shows, she eventually shot to international stardom with the Matrix series. But even success had its cost. Carrie found herself constantly scrutinized, criticized for her appearance, her choices, and her personal life. The more popular she became, the more people seemed to want a piece of her, and that was something she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just the superficial aspects of fame that took their toll. It was the loneliness. Behind the red carpets, the interviews, and the glitzy parties, Carrie often found herself isolated. Friends came and went, and romantic relationships had their own set of challenges, especially when it felt like everyone around her was either using her for her fame or walking away when things got tough. But one relationship, one constant, had always remained: Keanu Reeves. Their friendship had begun during The Matrix, and it had only grown stronger over the years. They understood each other in ways that most people couldn't. Keanu, who was also known for his humble, down-to-earth nature, never treated Carrie like she was just another star. To him, she was a person, a friend, a real one. They shared similar values about kindness, respect, and staying grounded, no matter how high the world around them soared. Keanu had always been there for her. Through the press tours, the long filming hours, and the private struggles, Keanu stood by her side, offering support and laughter when the weight of it all threatened to pull her under. In the first-class lounge that day, as Carrie had faced off with John, she had felt a wave of anger building within her. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the years of people assuming they could treat her any way they wanted because of her fame. The disrespect, the condescension. It had all become too much. She had had enough. As she stood there, taking in the scene, she realized that Keanu's arrival wasn't just a random coincidence. She felt a deep sense of gratitude that he was there, especially after everything she had been through. Maybe this encounter was more than just a confrontation over a seat. Maybe it was the universe reminding her that there were still people who saw her for who she truly was. Not just the actress, but the woman who had fought so hard to make a name for herself. Keanu's calm, composed demeanor was a contrast to the chaos swirling around them. His mere presence made her feel safe, like everything might just work out okay. She gave him a small, grateful smile before turning her attention back to John. But the smug man wasn't backing down. He was still glaring at them, clearly feeling threatened, embarrassed by Keanu's intervention. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to assert their superiority over Carrie. She had been on the receiving end of snide comments and dismissive attitudes more times than she cared to count. But there was something about this moment, something different. This wasn't just an isolated encounter. It was a test, a challenge to see how far her patience could stretch. In that instant, Carrie realized that the days of quietly enduring these slights were over. She wasn't going to let John's entitled attitude define her. She had come too far, fought too hard, and suffered too much to let someone like him walk all over her. Her gaze shifted to Keanu, who stood beside her, his eyes locked on John, waiting for the next move. Carrie took a deep breath and, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to feel a sense of empowerment. The old Carrie Moss, the one who had once been intimidated by the judgment of others, was no longer the woman standing before John today. She was someone who had learned to stand up for herself, someone who knew her worth. And with that, the tension in the room shifted. "John," Carrie said, her voice steady but firm, "you may have money, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people like they're beneath you. That seat doesn't belong to you just because you're rich. It belongs to whoever needs it." John was momentarily stunned, thrown off balance by her words. For the first time, the arrogant smile slipped from his face. Keanu stepped forward, his expression unreadable, yet his voice rang out with quiet authority. "You should show more respect, John. We're all just people here, regardless of what we have or don't have." The room was silent now, everyone waiting for John's next move. The tension had reached a boiling point, But Carrie felt something inside her snap, something that had been buried for so long. It was time to take back control. John cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain his composure. I didn't mean to cause a scene, he stammered, his previous confidence now faltering. Carrie smiled, the faintest hint of triumph in her eyes. No harm done, she said coolly, but maybe you should reconsider how you treat people in the future. And with that, John awkwardly stepped back, looking more embarrassed than ever. The situation had been diffused, but for Carrie, it was more than just a victory over a rude man. It was a reminder that she had the power to change the narrative, her narrative. As John retreated to a different part of the lounge, Carrie exchanged a look with Keanu, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Thanks, Keanu, she said quietly. I needed that. Keanu simply nodded, his signature calm smile crossing his face. Anytime. The tension had finally broken, but Carrie knew this moment would stick with her. It was a reminder that no matter where you were in life, whether sitting in a first-class lounge or standing on a movie set, you were never too important to stand up for what was right. And for Carrie Moss, this was just the beginning of reclaiming her power. Carrie's moment of victory over John Richardson was fleeting, but it left a lasting mark on her. The rest of the flight passed without incident, and soon, she was sitting in a comfortable seat on her private jet, heading to her next destination. The world outside was a blur of clouds and distant lights, but inside, Carrie was lost in thought. Keanu had taken the seat across from her, quietly reading a book, but every now and then, his gaze would drift to her, sensing her unease. Despite the initial relief from standing up to John, a simmering feeling remained inside her. It wasn't just about what had happened in the lounge. It was the feeling that her life was becoming more and more about navigating these moments of conflict. But the truth was, Carrie had been dealing with tension for a long time. She had tried to keep her personal life private, but the public's insatiable thirst for drama never let up. Everywhere she went, the paparazzi were there. Rumors swirled around her relationships, her career choices, even her friendships. It was exhausting. The weight of everyone's expectations, the constant scrutiny, it was wearing her thin. She had learned to keep a calm exterior, to smile when the cameras flashed, but inside, there was a growing storm. Keanu, sensing her silence, put down his book and gave her a look of concern. You all right? Carrie glanced at him, offering a small smile. I'm fine. Just thinking. Keanu raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. I know you, Carrie. You're not fine. What's going on? She let out a breath, leaning back in her seat as she gazed out the window. The storm of emotions inside her was hard to articulate. It wasn't just the incident with John. It was everything building up over the years. The pressure, the loneliness, the constant battle to prove she was more than just an actress, more than just a pretty face. She had worked so hard to carve out a place for herself, and yet, sometimes it felt like everything she'd achieved was overshadowed by people's need to tear her down. I guess I'm just tired, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Tired of pretending everything's okay when it's not. Tired of people thinking they can treat me however they want because they think they know me. Or worse, they don't care to know me at all. Keanu nodded, his expression softening. You've been carrying a lot for a long time, Carrie. I see it. I know it. But you don't have to carry it alone. Carrie chuckled, the sound bitter. Sometimes it feels like I have no choice. People only want what they want from me. They don't care about the person underneath it all. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. That's why I'm here. I care about you. We all need someone who gets us for who we really are. She met his eyes, and for the first time in a while, she felt seen. Not as an actress or a celebrity, but as the woman who had fought through hardships, the woman who had been hurt and was now trying to figure out how to heal. I'm lucky to have you, Keanu, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself. It's like I'm always playing a role, on camera, off camera, everywhere. You're not losing yourself, Keanu reassured her. You just need to remember who you are, apart from the world's expectations. It's okay to take a step back and breathe. Carrie nodded slowly, absorbing his words. But even as the conversation brought some peace, She knew that the conflict she was facing wasn't just internal. It was external, too. The world had a way of testing people, pushing them to their limits. And Carrie knew that what had happened in the lounge with John wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something bigger, a shift in how she viewed herself and the people around her. The next day, when Carrie stepped off the plane, she was greeted with the usual fanfare. Flashing cameras, curious reporters, and the low hum of gossip. She wasn't naive enough to think she could avoid it. But this time, she wasn't going to shy away from the spotlight. She had spent so much of her life trying to be everything for everyone else. Pleasing directors, keeping up with the latest trends, saying yes to every job, every opportunity, even when she wasn't sure if it was what she truly wanted. The pressure had become overwhelming. But she was done with that. Carrie had to make a change, not just for her career, but for her own peace of mind. She had worked hard to get where she was, but now she had to start asking herself, what was the point of all this success if it came at the cost of her happiness? As she walked through the airport terminal, a few steps ahead of the paparazzi, she saw someone familiar in the crowd. It was another famous face, someone who had also been through the fire of public judgment, someone who had learned to navigate this world in their own way. It was Reese, a fellow actress, and a good friend from her early days in Hollywood. Reese was a reminder of what Carrie wanted to hold on to, a sense of camaraderie, a sense of sisterhood that wasn't tainted by fame or competition. They had always supported each other through the highs and lows, and now, Carrie felt a wave of relief seeing her there. "Carrie," Reese called out, waving as she approached. "How are you holding up?" Carrie smiled, grateful for the genuine warmth in Reese's voice. "Better, now that I see you." Reese laughed, giving her a hug. "It's been too long. Let's grab some coffee, yeah?" Carrie didn't hesitate. She needed that break. Away from the cameras, away from the constant pressure to be something she wasn't. She needed a moment of real connection, and Reese was exactly the kind of person who could offer that. As they walked out of the terminal together, Carrie felt a shift within herself. She was no longer going to let the external conflicts define her. She wasn't going to let the pressures of fame dictate her happiness. It was time to take control of her life, starting now. But little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger journey ahead. A journey that would test her, challenge her, and ultimately help her rediscover the person she had lost along the way. The coffee shop was a small, quiet place tucked away from the chaos of the airport. Carrie and Reese sat in a corner booth, their conversation flowing easily as they caught up on life. The noise from the bustling airport outside seemed miles away, and for the first time in a while, Carrie felt like she could breathe. "So, how's everything going with the new movie?" Reese asked, sipping her latte. Carrie hesitated for a moment, the question taking her back to the grind of her career. It had been a while since she'd felt the excitement of a new project. Lately, it all felt like routine, like she was checking boxes rather than chasing passion. "It's fine," Carrie said, her tone flat. "It's just another role, you know? Sometimes, I wonder if it's all worth it." Reese frowned, clearly sensing the frustration in her voice. "You've worked so hard to get where you are, Carrie, but you don't have to keep going if it doesn't bring you joy anymore." Carrie nodded, but the weight of her own thoughts was hard to ignore. She'd spent years building her career, establishing herself as a household name. But lately, she'd felt more like a product than a person. It wasn't just about acting anymore. It was about meeting expectations, maintaining an image, and surviving the circus of Hollywood. "I know. I guess I just don't know what I want anymore," she admitted, her eyes tracing the steam rising from her cup. "Sometimes, I think I'm just doing it because it's all I know. But is it enough?" Reese reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Carrie's. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you have to give yourself the space to figure it out." Carrie smiled, grateful for Reese's support. It wasn't just her friend's words that comforted her. It was the simplicity of the moment. Sitting here, talking, feeling understood, was a small piece of peace she hadn't realized she'd been craving. But as much as Carrie wanted to embrace this newfound clarity, reality had a way of catching up with her. As they finished their coffee, a sudden buzz from Carrie's phone interrupted the conversation. She glanced at the screen and saw an alert, a headline that made her stomach drop. Carrie Moss and Keanu Reeves. What really happened in the first-class lounge? The article was accompanied by a photo of her and Keanu, taken moments after their confrontation with John in the lounge. The article, of course, misrepresented the entire situation, framing it as a dramatic showdown between a rich man and a high-profile actress. Carrie felt her heart race as she clicked on the link, scanning the article. The writer speculated wildly, suggesting that she had been a diva, demanding the first-class seat, and that Keanu had only intervened because of their rumored romance. The story was full of half-truths, exaggerations, and assumptions. It wasn't a showdown at all. It was a moment of standing up for herself. But now, it was being twisted to fit the narrative of a Hollywood scandal. She leaned back in her seat, feeling a wave of frustration wash over her. This was exactly what she had feared. The constant scrutiny, the misinterpretation of her actions. No matter how much she tried to stay grounded, the world had a way of taking control of her story. Reese noticed the change in Carrie-Anne's demeanor and immediately looked at her phone. Her expression darkened as she read the article. People never get it right, do they? Reese said with a sigh, shaking her head. Carrie-Anne didn't respond right away. She felt the familiar anger building inside her. The anger that came from being constantly misunderstood, being reduced to a headline, a character, rather than a person. "I'm tired of this," Carrie-Anne muttered. "Tired of the lies, the constant need to be something I'm not. I just want to live my life without this circus." Reese gave her a sympathetic look. "I get it, but you can't control what people say about you. The only thing you can control is how you respond." Carrie-Anne sat in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. She had always been someone who cared deeply about how others saw her, but Reese was right. No matter what she did, there would always be people who didn't understand her, who only saw the version of her that the media wanted to sell. She felt her phone buzz again. This time, it was a text from Keanu. "Hey, I saw the article. Don't let it get to you. We both know the truth. Let's talk later." Keanu. Carrie-Anne smiled softly, her anger momentarily giving way to gratitude. Keanu had been a constant source of support, and his message reminded her that she wasn't alone in this. He had seen the truth of what had happened in the lounge. He knew who she really was, beyond the headlines and the rumors. "I'm lucky to have him in my corner," Carrie-Anne said quietly, almost to herself. Reese nodded. "You are. And don't forget, you've got a lot of people who care about you. This won't be the last time something like this happens, but you don't have to face it alone." Carrie-Anne felt a sense of peace settle over her. As much as she had tried to navigate this life on her own, she was beginning to realize that she didn't have to. She had people who saw her for who she truly was, not for the character the world had created. But just as she was beginning to feel a sense of clarity, another message popped up on her phone. A notification from social media. Carrie-Anne Moss, first-class diva or victim of entitlement? Her heart sank. The narrative was growing, and it was growing fast. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was becoming a story that was already being told to millions. Carrie-Anne took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. She had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier to face. "Let's get out of here," she said to Reese, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I need to clear my head." As they left the coffee shop, the weight of the situation was still heavy on her shoulders. Carrie-Anne knew that the road ahead was going to be filled with more challenges. The public's perception of her was shifting, and she had to figure out how to navigate this new phase of her life. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let the world dictate her story anymore. It was time for Carrie-Anne Moss to take control of her narrative. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Carrie-Anne. The media frenzy surrounding her incident in the first-class lounge only escalated, and soon, her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, rumors, theories, and every tabloid imaginable speculating on what had actually transpired. It was exhausting. Her phone's screen constantly lit up with text from her team, asking her to comment on the situation, demanding that she make a statement, trying to control the narrative. But Carrie-Anne was no longer interested in playing that game. She didn't want to talk to publicists or read another misleading headline. She needed space, something the public didn't seem to understand. Keanu had reached out to her several times, offering support and asking if she wanted to get together, but Carrie hadn't responded right away. She was still processing everything that had happened. The entire situation was starting to weigh heavily on her, and she needed to figure out how to move forward without losing herself in the chaos. After a few days of silence, Carrie decided she needed to step away from it all, even if only for a moment. She contacted Keanu, and they made plans to meet up in a quiet, secluded part of town, away from the cameras and the gossip. When they met, it was in an intimate, low-key restaurant, far from the prying eyes of Hollywood. Carrie arrived first, finding a small table tucked in the back. The space was peaceful, a far cry from the constant noise she'd been enduring lately. Keanu walked in a few minutes later, his familiar presence immediately calming her. He didn't have to say anything. Just the sight of him made her feel like everything was going to be okay, even if only for that moment. He sat down across from her, his usual calm demeanor in full force. "How are you really doing, Carrie?" She sighed, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't even know anymore. I'm so tired of this. It feels like I'm drowning in other people's perceptions of me. I can't breathe, Keanu." Keanu leaned forward, his gaze intense but understanding. "I get it. The weight of it all can suffocate you if you let it. But you can't let it. You've been through so much already. This is just noise." Carrie looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just noise. It's real. Every single headline, every comment, they're real. People are taking pieces of me and twisting them into something I'm not. I don't even know who I am in all of this anymore." The raw honesty in her voice struck Keanu, and he reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "I see you. I've always seen you. And you're not what the world says you are. You're more than the headlines, more than the rumors. You've got a heart that doesn't deserve to be dragged through the mud like this." Carrie swallowed the lump in her throat. "I feel so lost. All of this success, all of this fame. It's supposed to mean something, but it feels like it's taken everything from me. My peace, my privacy, my identity." Keanu's eyes softened. "I know it's tough right now, but I've seen you when you're at your best, when you're not trying to be anyone other than yourself. And that's who you really are, Carrie. You're not defined by what people say about you. You're defined by how you show up for yourself and the people who truly matter." Carrie couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came, silently at first, then in heavy waves. For so long, she had held it all in, trying to maintain control, trying to stay strong. But in that moment, sitting across from Keanu, she finally allowed herself to break down. Keanu didn't say anything more. He just sat there, holding her hand, giving her the space to feel everything she had been bottling up. The tears weren't just for the pain she had been feeling in the wake of the public scandal. They were for all the years of pushing herself too hard, of sacrificing her own well-being for the sake of a career and an image she had never truly owned. She had spent so much time trying to please everyone else, trying to be perfect in the eyes of the world, that she had lost sight of who she really was. Keanu's steady presence was the anchor she had needed. His support, quiet but unwavering, gave her the strength to finally let go of the facade. When she had calmed down, Carrie looked at him, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "Thank you for being here. I don't know what I would do without you." Keanu gave her a soft, understanding smile. "You don't ever have to go through this alone, Carrie. I'll always be here. But you need to start being kind to yourself. You can't keep carrying this weight on your own." Carrie nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. It wasn't just about standing up to the world anymore. It was about standing up to herself. She had to stop letting the pressures of fame and success define her. She had to take back control of her life and her happiness. The waiter arrived with their food, but Carrie wasn't hungry. She had already had the nourishment she needed, the kind that came from the support of someone who truly cared. After dinner, Keanu walked her to her car, and as they said their goodbyes, he gave her one last piece of advice. "Don't let this moment define you, Carrie. Use it to redefine what's important to you. The rest? It'll fade away. But you'll stay." Carrie watched him walk away, feeling a renewed sense of clarity. She wasn't going to let the world's opinion of her shape her reality. She was going to take a step back, reevaluate, and rebuild her life on her terms. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way forward. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days following her conversation with Keanu felt like a cleansing, a slow, steady shift in Carrie-Ann's perspective. The media continued to churn out sensational headlines about her, but Carrie-Ann didn't let it consume her like it had before. She had taken the first step towards reclaiming her life and identity, and she wasn't going to let anyone or anything take that away from her. She spent the next few weeks retreating from the spotlight, focusing on her personal life and rediscovering what truly mattered. No interviews, no press tours, just time with family, quiet walks in the park, and evenings spent reading books she had put down years ago. She began to explore new passions, things she had long pushed aside in the pursuit of perfection. She reconnected with herself, something she hadn't realized she had lost in the blur of the Hollywood machine. Carrie-Ann also reached out to the people who had always supported her, her close friends and family who had been by her side long before the fame and the cameras. They reminded her of the woman she was before all the chaos began, the woman who wasn't defined by her success or the public's expectations. It wasn't long before she started seeing the effects of this newfound clarity. She felt lighter, more at peace with herself. Her days weren't filled with the anxiety that had once plagued her every move. She was learning to be present again. One afternoon, as she sat in her garden reading a book, her phone rang. It was Reese. Carrie-Ann smiled as she answered the call, knowing that Reese had been a steady presence in her life through all the ups and downs. "Hey, you." Reese's voice was warm and familiar. "How are you doing?" Carrie-Ann leaned back in her chair, closing the book for a moment. "I'm doing okay, actually. Better than okay. I've been spending some time away from everything, just getting back to basics. And it's been so good for me. I'm not chasing anything anymore. I'm just living." Reese let out a soft laugh. "That sounds incredible. I'm really happy to hear that. You deserve it." Carrie-Ann paused for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The scandal, the backlash, the moments of doubt. She had been in the middle of it all, and now, she felt like she was standing on the other side, seeing things more clearly. But there was something she still had to do. "I've been thinking about the whole thing with the lounge," Carrie-Ann said, her tone serious. "I haven't spoken about it publicly yet, but I feel like it's time to set the record straight. Not for anyone else, but for me. I don't want to leave things hanging in the air, with the world defining me based on an edited narrative." Reese's voice softened. "You're ready, aren't you?" "I think I am," Carrie-Ann replied. "It's not about defending myself. It's about owning my truth. I'm tired of being silent about who I am and what I stand for." And so, after days of reflection, Carrie-Ann called a press conference. She knew the media would come with their questions, their assumptions, but she was no longer afraid of their scrutiny. This time, she was prepared to speak with her own voice, to tell her side of the story, not to clear her name, but to claim her narrative. On the day of the conference, the room was packed with journalists, cameras flashing as Carrie-Ann took her seat at the podium. She was calm, collected, and ready to speak her truth. The public had seen her as an image, a character, and she was finally ready to show them the woman behind that character. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice strong and steady. "I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on everything that's happened, on the media frenzy, the assumptions, and the way my actions were interpreted by the public. And I've come to a simple conclusion. It's time to take control of my story." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "I am not perfect. I am not immune to mistakes, and I've never claimed to be. But the incident that took place in the lounge was not what it was made out to be. It wasn't a showdown or a scandal. It was a simple moment where I stood up for myself. I wasn't demanding special treatment. I was asserting my right to be treated with respect, as anyone would." Carrie-Ann's gaze swept over the room. The reporters were silent, waiting for more. "I want to make one thing clear," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am not defined by what others think of me. I am not a character on a screen, nor am I a headline in a magazine. I am a person, just like everyone else. And I will no longer allow the world to tell me who I am or what I stand for." There was a brief silence in the room, and then the questions began. "Carrie-Ann, How do you feel about the way the media has portrayed you? One reporter asked. I've been through a lot in my life, personally and professionally, but I've learned that I can't control how others see me. I can only control how I see myself, and that's enough for me. Another reporter spoke up. Do you think your relationship with Keanu Reeves played a role in the incident? Carrie smiled slightly. Keanu and I have been friends for years. What happened in the lounge wasn't about him. It wasn't about me, and it certainly wasn't about any so-called romance. It was about me standing up for myself, and Keanu being the kind of person who supports his friends. That's it. As the conference went on, Carrie's words began to resonate with the room. There was no scandal, no drama, just a woman who was tired of being misunderstood and finally ready to take ownership of her life. By the time the conference ended, Carrie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The truth had been spoken, and while she knew the media would continue to churn out stories, she no longer cared. She had taken back control of her narrative. That evening, as Carrie sat on her couch, scrolling through the messages that had poured in from friends, family, and fans, she realized something important. The world would always have its opinions, its judgments, and its noise. But the only thing that truly mattered was how she lived her life. Authentically, with kindness, and on her own terms. She wasn't the woman the media had painted her to be. She wasn't defined by her career, by a scandal, or by anyone's expectations. She was Carrie Moss, and that was enough. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow through her window, Carrie took a deep breath and smiled. It was time to move forward, without fear, without shame, and without apology. Weeks passed, and Carrie found herself settling into a new chapter of life. The media storm had calmed, and while the headlines still occasionally mentioned her name, the sensationalism had faded. More important than the tabloids was her own sense of peace. The rush of constant public scrutiny had taught her a lesson in resilience, but it also taught her something deeper, the importance of living authentically. Carrie knew that reclaiming her story wasn't just about defending herself from public opinion. It was about crafting a life where she felt truly aligned with who she was. And that wasn't something that could be done through a press conference or a viral moment. It was something that required everyday choices, small acts of self-compassion, and most importantly, the support of people who genuinely cared. The months that followed were filled with quiet moments and introspective discoveries. She spent time traveling, not for work, but simply to explore. She revisited her love for art, taking pottery classes and attending exhibits that allowed her to tap into a creative side she had long neglected. It wasn't about the fame. It was about the joy of creating something meaningful just for herself. Keanu continued to be her rock throughout this journey. While their friendship had been solid for years, something had shifted. Their late-night talks, the moments they spent laughing and supporting one another. It was all so effortless. There were no expectations, no pressure. It was a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. In many ways, he had been the anchor she didn't know she needed. One evening, as they sat together at one of their favorite spots, an intimate cafe by the water, Carrie looked at Keanu and found herself reflecting on everything they had been through. The challenges they faced, both separately and together, had brought them closer, but they had also helped her understand something important. Keanu, do you ever think about how we got here? She asked, her voice gentle, though filled with curiosity. I mean, it feels like we've been on different paths that have somehow merged at this point. Keanu took a sip of his coffee, his gaze thoughtful. I've thought about it a lot. Life has a way of throwing us into unexpected situations, and sometimes you just have to trust that they're leading you somewhere. I think we were always meant to cross paths in the way we did. And in the end, it brought us to this peace, this understanding. Carrie smiled softly, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. It wasn't just about the external world anymore. It was about the connection they shared, the quiet moments of shared wisdom and care that didn't need to be shouted out loud. It was in the way Keanu had shown up for her when she was at her lowest, and how their friendship had evolved in a way that felt organic, like a flower that had bloomed in its own time. I don't know where life will take us next, Carrie mused, but I feel ready for whatever comes. I'm not the same person I was before the lounge incident, or before all the media frenzy. I've grown, and it's a good feeling. Keanu reached over and gently touched her hand. You've always had it in you, Carrie. It's just a matter of owning it. And I think you're doing just that. Carrie thought about the ups and downs of the past few months. Her career, her personal life, and the public drama. At times, it had felt like a storm. But now, standing on the other side of it, she felt stronger, more in tune with herself. She no longer needed validation from others. The only validation she sought now was from within. As she gazed out over the water, a feeling of calmness settled over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to control it. She had learned to trust the process. And just then, as if to affirm her thoughts, Keanu turned to her with a smile. You know, he began, life is unpredictable, but one thing's for sure. You've got a bright future ahead, Carrie. Whatever you do next, I know it's going to be amazing. Carrie's heart swelled at his words. She knew they were true. She didn't need to have everything figured out right now. The only thing that mattered was taking each day as it came, trusting herself, and knowing that she was worthy of the peace she had fought for. And with that thought, Carrie took a deep breath, feeling more at ease than she had in years. She wasn't defined by the lounge incident or the media's portrayal of her. She was defined by her heart, her choices, and her journey of self-discovery. As she walked away from the cafe with Keanu by her side, Carrie knew that life would continue to throw challenges her way, but now she faced them with a newfound strength. The world would always have its opinions, but the one that mattered most was hers. And with that, she was finally free. A year had passed since the press conference that marked a turning point in Carrie's life. She had kept her promise to herself. She didn't let the past define her, and she didn't allow the world to dictate her choices. The spotlight that once burned so brightly now felt distant, as if it was a part of her story but no longer the whole of it. Carrie had found peace, but peace, she'd learned, wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Keanu's words still echoed in her mind. You've got a bright future ahead, Carrie. Whatever you do next, I know it's going to be amazing. The question of what's next had been swirling in her thoughts. She had always been driven, always had a vision of what she wanted from life. But now, that vision wasn't clouded by expectations or the need to prove herself. Carrie had discovered a deeper part of her, a woman who wanted to make a difference in the world, who wanted her work to carry meaning beyond the glitz of Hollywood. She had taken time to reflect on her values, and over the course of the year, a passion for activism had begun to take root. She had always been socially conscious, but now she felt a strong calling to get involved in causes that spoke to her heart. Climate change, mental health, gender equality. These were the issues she wanted to address. The public figure that everyone had once thought of as just an actress was ready to be something more meaningful. Carrie had always believed in using her platform for good, but now she wanted to go beyond the hashtags and headlines. She was working on creating a non-profit organization dedicated to mental health awareness in the entertainment industry. The pressure of the industry was something she knew all too well, and she had seen the toll it took on so many others. She wanted to create a safe space, a voice for those who struggled in silence. Her work would be her legacy. One day, as she sat in her home office drafting plans for the foundation, her phone rang. It was Keanu. Their conversations had become a regular part of her routine, sometimes deep and philosophical, other times lighthearted and fun. Hey, how's it going? Carrie answered, smiling. Busy, as usual, Keanu replied, his voice warm. But I've been thinking about what you've been working on. Your nonprofit, it's inspiring. I think you're going to change a lot of lives. Carrie couldn't help but laugh. You're such a cheerleader. Thank you, Keanu. It means a lot to hear that from you. Keanu chuckled. I'm not just a cheerleader. I believe in you. You've always had this fire inside of you. Now, you're channeling it into something that truly matters. Her heart swelled at his words. Keanu had always been her biggest supporter, but this felt different. It wasn't just a friend's encouragement. It was an acknowledgement of her growth, of her new purpose. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone on this journey. I'm feeling good about it, Carrie continued. It's been a lot of work, but I feel like I'm finally doing something that feels right. Something real. Keanu paused for a moment. I know you've had your struggles, Carrie, but I think this is your calling. You're not just making a difference in your own life. You're going to help so many people. It's incredible. Carrie Ann leaned back in her chair, contemplating his words. She hadn't realized just how far she'd come, not only in her personal growth but also in her ability to impact the world. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was someone who had learned from her experiences and wanted to pass that knowledge on, to help others avoid the pitfalls she had faced. Thank you, Keanu. I don't think I'd be here without you, she said softly, her gratitude overflowing. Keanu's voice softened. You'd be here. You've always had it in you. I just helped remind you of what you were capable of. And in that moment, Carrie Ann realized something profound. The journey she had been on was never just about overcoming the public challenges, the criticisms, or the scandals. It had always been about rediscovering herself, rebuilding the foundation of who she truly was. Keanu had been there, yes, but she had always had the strength within her. The courage, the passion, the ability to turn pain into purpose. Carrie Ann was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. She had let go of the need to meet expectations, of chasing after some elusive ideal of success. Her success now was measured not by box office numbers or media coverage, but by the lives she could touch and the positive impact she could make. As she stood up from her desk and gazed out the window, watching the world go by, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She had faced the storm and come out the other side. What had once seemed like the end was now the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Reese, who had been one of her biggest supporters through this entire journey. Hey, Carrie, I just wanted to remind you that you're doing an incredible job. The world needs people like you. You're going to change everything. Carrie Ann smiled, feeling her heart warm with appreciation. Her friends, her family, and Keanu. They all believed in her, and that belief had given her the strength to keep going. She wasn't doing it alone. She was ready for what came next. It wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had the courage to stand in her truth, to follow her passion, and to use her voice for something greater than herself. As the day came to an end and Carrie Ann prepared for bed, she thought about all the people who had stood by her side. They had seen her at her worst and her best, and they still believed in her. She wasn't defined by her mistakes, her past, or the opinions of others. She was defined by her choices, her actions, and the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Carrie Ann Moss wasn't just a name or a character on a screen. She was a woman with purpose, a woman who had fought her battles, learned from them, and was now ready to make a lasting impact. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun.